When America's men went off to World War II, America's women went to work, building the planes and tanks and trucks that won the war. But even when our fighting men came home and reclaimed their jobs, Rosie the Riveter never quite lost her taste for a paycheck. For 60 years, the percentage of American women in the workforce kept rising, to the point that by 1999, 3/4 of women aged 25 to 54 were working. For most of that time, the United States had one of the highest rates of women employed in the world. But since then, women have left the workforce in greater numbers. Today, less than 70% of women aged 25 to 54 are employed.
Yes, it's fallen, but it's not fallen off a cliff. I think what it is it's kind of leveled out after that long, steady ascent. And I think that's what has people talking. I think we should also look at the context. The context is this is happening around one of the worst recessions since the Great Depression, if not the worst recession. So the larger economic picture certainly plays a role in what we're seeing here.
That's Pamela Stone, a visiting scholar at the Stanford University Clayman Institute for Gender Research and professor of sociology at Hunter College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She's also author of the book Opting Out: Why Women Really Quit Careers and Head Home. She says that women's workforce participation actually started dropping before the recession.
I think the big reason is we were used to a situation of ever and ever upward and onward for women's labor force participation at a rate of increase that was probably not sustainable when you think about it. The other side of that is that we also know that women's labor force participation, especially the work of mothers, is something that's kind of a key social indicator, a hot button topic. It is very closely watched, and I think people read a lot into it. But why should we care? I think we should care because we want to have a situation where we make full use of all of our human capital, men and women, and it looks like women, even though men's labor force participation has also been hit, women's being hit a little bit harder. And, thinking about how we can sort of utilize that talent is a real challenge.
America's always been a bit ambivalent about working moms. For a long time, it seemed as if women with kids were criticized no matter whether they worked or not. But Claudia Goldin, professor of economics at Harvard University, says that's changed.
There was a time when we have some pretty good Gallup poll data from the 30s to the present with the question, if a woman has a child below the age of 6 or something, is it okay if she is in the labor force? And the answers to that question changed enormously over time. So I don't think that that is a big issue. In fact, many women who are, let us say, stay-at-home moms complain that it's just the reverse, that they feel that they're stigmatized, that they're not career women, that they don't have a profession, that they don't have a life outside the home.
Of course, it all depends on the age of the kids and the stage of life for mom. While overall workplace participation for women has declined, that's not true for some groups. For example, Goldin says among women age 55 plus, more of them are working.
One reason is that relative to decades ago, work is better. Work is nicer for most people. And for many people, retirement is something that they feel is in their late 60s or their 70s or maybe even older than that. So the first thing is that the nature of work has changed. People are healthier. Many women in these cohorts have returned to the labor force at some point, and they don't want to give up. And some of them are divorced. For many groups, it's that they find identity in their work. They have invested enormously in their human capital, in their training, and they would like to use it.
College-educated moms, among all groups of moms, actually have the highest rates of labor force participation. They're working at about 75 to 78%, so quite high. But for them, the challenge is that the hours of those kind of professional jobs are oftentimes very long. And there's kind of constant on-call when you're in the management ranks. So for them, it's the long hours and often the long hours of their spouse because we're seeing a lot of dual-career couples. At the lower end, it's that workers can't get enough hours to make work worth it. The wages haven't budged in a long, long time, so the salaries are low, the earnings are low. Women have to always, and men, but unfortunately it's usually balanced against women's earnings. Women are balancing what they can earn against what it costs to work. And obviously, when you're at the low-wage labor market, the cost of that balance, that calculus doesn't come out very favorably. It oftentimes costs you more to work than not to work.
That's the group that Stone says is really fueling the decline in women in the workplace. Younger, less educated women in lower wage jobs who have fewer options and a tougher job market. especially women with children for whom daycare is just too expensive. Many of them turn to part-time work, sometimes out of a desire for flexibility, but often out of necessity.
One of the things employers are doing for a variety of reasons is they're creating more part-time jobs, which are jobs that do not make it possible for workers to earn a living. So one of the things we're seeing, along with the drop in labor force participation rates, is we're seeing an increase in what's called involuntary part-time. In other words, workers who would like to work more hours but cannot get more hours. So that's a real problem, too. Employers are sometimes cutting up jobs into part-time jobs, making jobs part-time. That makes it much tougher for workers. One of the ways they try to solve that problem is they go out and they get multiple jobs. So they're not juggling just one job against a family. They're juggling two jobs, sometimes three jobs against a family in order to make ends meet. Because part-time work, besides being fewer hours, the hourly rate of pay at part-time jobs is always lower than, a full-time job. So there's many penalties to part-time work.
But employers have few reasons to make accommodations to either part-time or full-time workers when there are multiple people looking for every available job.
We have a workplace that's very, very unfamily friendly. So it's very difficult for working moms in retail sector, for example, to be able to pull together childcare to afford it because of the recession and because the labor market is so tight. Employers are really demanding. They're making a lot of demands in terms of scheduling among low-end workers, like the large retail sector, for example, has gone to an almost just-in-time labor model where workers know sometimes only a day or two in advance the shift they're going to be working, the number of hours they're going to be working. So at the low end of the labor market, you see a lot of uncertainty and insecurity because the market is so tight. We are not making it easy for women especially to work and combine work with family. Whether we like it or not, women still are doing the vast share of child care and housekeeping work still. Even though we have working moms been long established, they're picking up a lot more. So the responsibility for that second shift falls much more on women than it does on men.
But even though the workplace gives time off grudgingly, many moms decide that they need to take more of it if their kids are going to grow up right. With no accommodation, it's one more reason for women to drop out of the workforce completely.
We're seeing a situation where the demands on parents are getting greater and greater and greater. And when you talk about parents, again, we're talking primarily about responsibilities that moms are going to take on. So at the same time that we see the workplace becoming a bit more unfamily friendly and really not that accommodating of working parents, we also see the demands on parents really accelerating. Anybody who's a parent now knows this. I mean, just the sheer security demands and the oversight that we have to exercise on kids today and the testing demands that are emanating from schools. There are just so many more things that are making parents having to really spend even more time with their kids.
But while America's female job force numbers are declining, it's not that way everywhere. Stone and Golden contrast the United States with Europe, where job participation numbers are still climbing.
About 30% of the difference in our labor force participation rate, women's labor force participation rate, and that of some counterpart European countries is due to the fact that they have these supports, these public policy supports such as child care, paid family leave, sick days, paid sick days, those kinds of things that make a huge difference in making it possible for families both to enter the labor force and keep working. We, of course, in the United States have a very laissez-faire approach. All of these arrangements around child care, for example, are all private. Very few public supports for any of those, and if there are, they're very limited, and they tend to be really means-tested and attached and available only to very low-income workers. We don't have paid family leave. For example, we're one of the very few countries that doesn't have paid family leave. All our counterpart European countries have it. We don't have it. We have family leave, unpaid family leave, the Family and Medical Leave Act. But even that only covers about 40 to 50% of workers. There's so many loopholes and so many conditions that have to be met before a worker is even eligible for that.
And if someone is eligible, it doesn't go nearly as far as it would in many other countries. Golden says it's unpaid leave, and you don't get very much of it.
We have a Family and Medical Leave Act that guarantees that you can take 12 weeks, unpaid, 12 weeks, return to that employer, and that employer has to have a comparable job for you, 12 weeks. Let's say that you have a kid and you decide that 12 weeks is too short a period of time for whatever reason, and you stay out for 14 weeks or 16 weeks. Your employer does not have to rehire you. So you have to then, when you come back, let's say if you do, you have to go out and get a new job. So that's the issue. The issue isn't so much the income. The issue is that you're not guaranteed your job.
Business has always argued that mandatory benefits like long-term paid family leave and subsidized child care would exact a huge cost on the economy. It could be ruinous for small firms, they say, to have to pay someone who's on leave and not showing up for work. But Stone says numerous studies show that's not what would happen. She says American companies now pay plenty when workers have to quit their jobs instead.
There's a huge cost in turnover. It costs $80,000 to $100,000 to replace a professional worker, for example. So to the extent that you're churning workers, you're incurring all kinds of costs that are really unproductive. So there's a lot of research that shows that for individual employers, these kinds of policies make enormous sense. There's a real business case for them because they don't lose people. I've done some research on this across 21 countries, actually, with some colleagues. It turns out when you give workers some kind of control over their schedule, for example, and even a modicum of control, they are much more satisfied with their job. They report much lower levels of work-family conflict, and they have a much greater commitment to their employer. I mean, they recognize that the employer is doing something for them and helping them make it possible for them to combine work and family. They're incredibly grateful. So I've never quite understood why this business case, which I can tell you is out there and is being strongly made by many people who are advocates in this area, just doesn't seem to get through, but is very clearly the case that it's costing employers money not to have these policies.
Stone says California and New Jersey have mandated paid sick days, and so far it hasn't bankrupted employers. But beyond the sheer economics, Golden says there's one other factor to consider, one that may ultimately be more important. How do children do as a result of flexible, family-friendly workplaces?
One of the real benefits from paid leave and from protected leave is that more time is spent with infants and more parental time with infants, and I mean not just mother's time but father's time, is just good for the infants and good for the children that they will be and the citizens in the economy and the society that they will be.
You can find out more about all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.net. You can always find our shows on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Reed Pence.
Coming up, what we can learn from traditional societies when Radio Health Journal continues.
More than 86 million Americans are living with prediabetes, but nearly 90% of them don't know they have it. That's why the American Medical Association and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are partnering to increase awareness about prediabetes through a new initiative called Prevent Diabetes STAT. AMA President Dr. Robert Waugh.
Type 2 diabetes is one of our nation's leading causes of suffering and death. It's time that we, as a nation, come together and take immediate action to prevent it by screening for prediabetes and helping those who have prediabetes prevent the progression to type 2 diabetes through proven lifestyle changes.
Prevent Diabetes STAT stands for Screen, Test, Act Today. It provides tools that guide physician practices to identify and refer people with prediabetes to evidence-based diabetes prevention programs in their communities. Act Today. Find out more at preventdiabetesstat.org or call your physician's office to see if prediabetes screening makes sense for you. Act today and join the effort to prevent diabetes.
When the leading antihistamine and Nasacort go nose to nose, Nasacort wins, stopping more of the chemical responses that can cause your nasal allergy symptoms. And when you stop more causes, you get 24-hour relief from sneezing, an itchy runny nose, even congestion. It's prescription strength medicine available over the counter. Nasacort Allergy 24-hour. Stops more of what makes you miserable. Use as directed.